civic initiative should be noticed. And from Krakow level, from my local level, so for instance, we gather support and money, for instance, for toys on removed toilets in Preševo. It was a terrible situation on the border with Serbia. So I think that in current time we should think about a little different global approach to building global solidarity, and we try to do it on local level or from local level in different places.
Thank you. That was fantastic. I mean, it's very heartening when you hear that kind of work being done in unpropitious circumstances when we look at the local government. And I'm reminded in the USA right now, there's a lot of mobilization at city level on environmental issues, for instance, on Black Lives Matter issues. So I think that notion of the space of the city is really, really important. But as I said to you last night when we were talking about this, one of the constraints we face in the UK on this is the fact that cities are so dependent on central government for their money. We've done some work at city level in the Women's Budget Group, and in some cities the local mayor, Bristol, for instance, London is welcoming to work on gender equality in the city, but the city itself hasn't got a lot of what resources is getting very constrained by national government, more so than cities in the USA, much more so than cities in the USA. So I think that issue of how the city gets its resources is something that can shape the extent to which you can do the kind of wonderful things that you're doing. Well, I would say that there are lots of groups in cities in the UK that have formed, we welcome refugees here groups, and city governments that have told the national government, but we've got room for some more refugees, you can send us some.
Yeah, but we have the same problem. So as far as refugees, so we cannot do a lot without permission of government. But we try to find different solutions. For instance, we still think about our activities from perspective of NGOs or main institution. But for instance, in our pro-refugee activities, we put pressure on different partners. So for instance, in project that I mentioned with Syrian artists, so I receive support from National Theatre, Goethe Institute, one German house, cultural foundation, one public institution, something between NGOs and city institution called Institute of Culture of Małopolska, it's my region. So I try to build wider coalition, but taking into account engagement of institution, because the thing of privatization experiences put our attention on private sector. So I try to find something between.
Sorry, yes. I have a question about feminization of politics. Anne Douglas, Columbia University, is a historian, a cultural, intellectual historian, wrote about her vision, looking back, of the feminization of politics in the United States, I think particularly in New York, after the Civil War and going up into the 20th century. And there, of course, it's a contested issue whenever it arises, both in terms of culture and in power, in politics, cultural power and formal power. And I was wondering whether a rounded account, not only of the promotion of this, but also the sources of opposition, will get a better picture of what the debates are going to be if it surfaces in debate rather than is kept out of public controversy. That can give a pathway towards positive features. I think particularly something like flat structures rather than hierarchical structures is already going on as theories in business schools of business organization, and with that the change of the idealization of the entrepreneurial leader who shapes everything, and that also seems to be coming back into debate because entrepreneurship and leadership are key terms in almost every part of the world of what we should be aiming at, and I'm very suspicious of that, both in terms of a notion of leadership and a notion of entrepreneurship as a solution to everything. So I was just wondering about if you have a sense of what the counters of debate about feminization of politics might be.
Okay, so next question.
I just had a question about coalitions and the relationship between social movements and those inside the institutions. And I wondered whether you could reflect on any problems that you've had in your context.
We have only problems.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Because I was going to say, my experience of these things is that they're very problematic, and there's lots of different power relations. And how do you manage those? You seem to have had a very successful experience. So your reflections on how you've managed those very problematic power relationships.
So it's my favorite question. So let me give you one example. So a few years ago, I organized the first open forum of Krakow's inhabitants. And I was one of the organizers. And I insist that it should be called forum of, we have double forum, male and female. So it was forum of female Krakow's inhabitants and male Krakow's inhabitants. And it was huge quarrel because conservative ecologists were against. So it was for them example of radical feminism, and that in their opinion it could destroy any kind of coalition, but they used to. And at the end, so the forum was called Female and Male Krakow's Inhabitants. But I think what is the most important is recognition of our input. So if I am feminist and I am part of this movement, they should used to that I am feminist with my agenda. And it's of course a very long process. But if we are concentrated on very particular local problem, it's much easier. For instance, we have smoke alert. It's against pollution, and it gathers so very different groups and informal groups, organization, and so on. So I think that there is a room for collaboration because if, for instance, now we have one promising party called Razem, but we collaborate together. But so we try to concentrate on very specific, defined problems.
Yeah, thank you.
So regardless of citizenship, disability, gender, nationality, and so on and so on. But coming back to your interesting question, so I I still believe that there is a new phenomenon in new municipalism. I have still problem how to define it, but maybe through some historical approach. We should remember that new urban movements were funded by people very often connected with NGO system. We should remember that women is a majority in NGO system. So through NGO system, they became important part of urban movement, and now they are important part of new municipalism. It's a little bit different that typical approach to leadership, because they